gonna break my heart again? Why am I gonna let you try? One of the things that we do, not just in politics, but in a lot of things, we tend to look at the problem and develop a program to address a problem. And when we reverse that idea with sort of a data-centric model for redesigning governance, things look very, very different. So this idea of the AVA report and being able to diagnose becomes much more interesting and I think much more relevant. So here's an example of, we've talked about this before, data trees. This is like a flow chart. So view, this is the way that we typically organize information or outlines, if you're in AP English or whatever. So we feel like, we're in an organized structure when, and websites and mobile stuff is organized this way too. You get back to the home page and this is your main menu and these are the subpages. So it's a very common sort of way for us to organize our thoughts as organizations. What we're actually talking about is something that looks a lot more like an X-ray. So in this example, I'm pretending that I've got two charts that will be something like what we'll do with the AVA report. And what we want to be able to do is have these be dynamic, sort of animated streams. So these things will actually be moving. And so what I want to do in this example is show that though we may have, two different patients here, those might be individuals or they might be cities. I were to look at the similar disease and say, okay, this individual is surrounded with a support network. So, they've got a bunch of friends, they've got emotional support, or in the case of a city, they've got like the IT infrastructure or what have you. And this individual lacks those things. So, a lot of the times our arguments come into play of, the way to handle this is a tough love situation. We need to make this person accountable. We need to have an intervention. We need to corner this individual and make them straighten up and fly right. But and that may very, very well be a correct course of action that might be the fastest way to get somewhere. Tough love, let's do that here. But if you were able to come over here and turn on the different social layers that are impacting, because this happens all the time in healthcare, is that, we don't have these things that are connected so that you might say this particular intervention is going to work for this patient, but this patient doesn't have the emotional support, or this patient or city doesn't have the particular infrastructure that this one might. Therefore, a more gentle and compassionate approach that might not strip away all of their illusions with tough love, hard truth-telling, but in fact might be a gentler. Now the course of action may take longer, and those are also choices. The individual or the organism's desire. How much do they want to change, or is this something where we can prescribe certain courses of action? So again, with the AVA report and with the data-driven redesign of governance, we're going to be able to get smarter. And that doesn't, double negative, negate the truth of either a compassionate approach, a gentle approach, a loving approach, or a hard truth intervention. Both of those things are right and true. Both of those things could actually solve the problem, but it does depend on the currents that are impacting, even though you might have two organisms that are suffering from a similar disease. In my case, I'm a painter and a seeker and a designer. So those would be the main things that I do with my life. Those are the things that I excel at. So we tend to look at it this way, as if the world were straight on, always straightforward and balanced. But that's not the case, right? usually. In this diagram, I've got the individual in what they call an axonometric view. You know, it depends on how we're viewing it. This also helps us to understand how people get into conflicts. So I got into a conversation about peacemaking as a consequence of this work. It wasn't like I was going for, oh, you know what we need is more peaceful solutions. It's just a consequence. It'll be a consequence. And a lot of the stuff that we have, a lot of the problems that we have, marginalized people groups and racism and gender inequality and blah, 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 blah. So we've got all of these problems, but when we start to look at the data in a different way, those problems, it's not that they cease to be there, it's just that that's not the path towards the solution, towards their solution. The solutions are a consequence of a new way of seeing. So, and I was making all these spin paintings. That's actually, and I was doing this scroll, and I was like moving this stuff around because I was thinking about, you know, environmental impacts. So let's take this, and I did this quick example with a tree the other day. So let's say that this is the view of our organization, right? So looking at it from my POV, and that's kind of the point here, let's just say, that's what my solution path looks like. Okay, looks very different here than it does from here, and it's curved. And so what you would perceive if we didn't have an understanding is that this will tend to be government program, this is a government program, this is a nonprofit, this is a corporate solution, when in fact, you know, a conversation about food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, sanitation is a part of a category of information, and it crosses, the solution path crosses depending on your POV and depending on the currents that are happening. So it might let you be like, oh, that looks completely insane. So, you know, how is it that you connect, you know, the crazy stuff that creative people always connect? You know, how do you do a mashup that's really relevant? That's how. So in this case, we connected an economic opportunity, and that's how these charts came into being, right?